Welcome to Pop Culture on the Apricot Tree, where we talk about gospel insights through great stories and help you find entertainment that is both true and beautiful. I'm your host, Carl Cranny, running the show for the first time. I have a PhD in religion and have written on the intersection of religious themes and pop culture. And with me today are three guests, of course. My co-host, Liz Busby. Liz, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, everybody. I'm Liz. I'm a writer of science fiction and fantasy, a reviewer of books, and a Latter-day Saint, of course.
All right. And Carl with a K, could you introduce yourself, please?
My name is Carl Hao, and I am a senior management official with the Internal Revenue Service. I have a couple of master's degrees in business and accounting, and I don't know, I like reading, and I really, really like pop culture.
Great. Glad to have you here. And Mike, if you could introduce yourself.
Well, my name is Mike Barnhill. I am a lawyer, which means I took the fast way to get a doctorate. My wife tells me it doesn't count, but it says doctor on my degree, so it counts.
I think it counts, but I understand the arguments that they don't. All right. We are going to open with our best books segment, where we each recommend something that we have been watching or reading or listening to. And I'll go first. And I would like to plug a podcast, actually. We in the Latter-day Saint sort of religious studies community lost someone today. Laura Harris Hales passed away from pancreatic cancer. And for those who are looking for a podcast that is scholarly and well-informed, yet also orthodox and faithful, I cannot recommend her LDS Perspectives podcast enough. There's like 130 episodes. It is wonderful, and I think it is just a marvelous thing that she started because a bunch of people from Sweden who sort of had been through a big faith crisis sort of as a group had her and her husband, who's sort of an expert in Latter-day Saint polygamy, out to talk about some of these hard issues. And they said, there aren't any good podcasts. They're all against the church. And so Laura started hers. And I think that was just a marvelous thing. And I was thinking of her today since she passed away. And if you're looking for something along those lines, can't recommend LDS Perspectives enough. So that's my recommendation for today. Liz, why don't you go ahead?
I'm always looking for a good podcast, so I'm subscribed to that one. My recommendation for today is A Short Stay in Hell by Stephen Peck. This is a short little book, but a fascinating book. I was trying to come up with like a read-alike for it today. I think the closest thing is C.S. Lewis's The Great Divorce, but not trying to establish correct doctrine, but it's just meditation on and eternity and what it might be like to have an eternity of time and how do you fill that. It's got an infinite library in it, but it is a evil infinite library. So highly recommend this short little book. I listened to the audiobook. It is available on Audible.
All right. Thank you for that. Carl, what do you got for us this week?
Well, before I recommend my book, I just want to say that hell is a bathroom that has nothing but the tax code for reading material.
You see this as we're recording the weekend before the tax deadline.
Right.
So I'd like to recommend The Way of Aloha Lanai. It was written by Cameron Taylor. It's a really neat book, sort of a fiction book that is based on notes from his mission to Hawaii, and it was an absolutely brilliant account. Very spiritual, some very highs, some points where you can't help but cry. But it's extremely masterful storytelling. So good that in fact that I picked it up one evening and couldn't put it down till I was finished. So I read the whole thing in one night. It was kind of an amazing read, and I certainly recommend it. That is Way of Aloha Lanai by Cameron Taylor.
I can find there is no higher compliment to a book than I stayed up all night reading it. So, excellent. Mike, what do you got for us this week?
Well, I'm making my way through the theological introductions to the Book of Mormon, that series. Um, so far, my favorite one has been the one by Mark Rathall, who, in my opinion, is one of our best scholars that we have as Latter day Saints. That guy is probably the smartest person I've ever met. Um, and his book is on the second half of Alma. I think it's 30 through 62. But the some of the things that he gets into are just like I've never read a better discussion of the relationship between knowledge, belief, and faith. Um, and he has an excellent discussion about mercy and justice. It's really awesome, and I can't wait to finish getting through it because Jim Faulkner did the book on ether, and so I love Jim too, so I can't wait to get to that one.
Yeah. Um, for those of you watching on YouTube, not only am I wearing my Star Trek shirt, I might not make it, red shirt. You can see here that I have the brief theological introductions myself on my shelf, and I haven't gotten into them yet because I just got them a month ago for my birthday. But I'll look forward to that as well on your recommendation, also, Mike. All right. Well, today we are talking about season 4 of Star Trek Discovery. It just wrapped up a little bit, and I thought what we should do is talk a little bit about our history as various Latter day Saint nerds with Star Trek, and then try to keep it mostly about season 4. But I know since this is our second time recording this because we lost a bunch of audio files, that we will be ranging all over Star Trek, and so this is going to be a fun little podcast. As far as me, I grew up watching Next Generation every Sunday night with my family. My dad even got in a little bit of trouble because he would say, no, we're not allowed to watch TV on Sundays. We're going to keep the Sabbath day holy. And eventually we figured out that he was being a little hypocritical because we were allowed to watch Next Generation, but none of the other shows on Sunday. But at the same time, it ended up being a really nice sort of bonding experience, and our family enjoyed sort of that tradition of watching that show together. And I've been a big fan of Star Trek ever since, with the exception of the most recent season of Picard, which I have not started. I have watched literally every episode and every movie of Star Trek that is ever produced, including the animated series. So that's a little bit about. Yeah, the animated series is actually a lot better than some people expect it to because they can do some interesting things because they didn't have to worry about the budget. Uh, yeah, so it's interesting, and actually I think almost more worthwhile than the original series in some ways, which may be blasphemy to some. But anyway, Liz, why don't you talk a little bit about your history with Star Trek?
I mean, same thing. We would all pile into my parents' room on Sunday nights and watch Star Trek Next Generation. And then I grew up watching Voyager in middle school and high school with some friends. Didn't get as much into Deep Space Nine until later because we would often miss episodes. And with the continuing story in Deep Space Nine, that made it hard to follow it. But I loved it when I watched it later as an adult on Netflix and binged the whole thing. And now, yeah, I'm working on keeping up on all the new stuff that's coming out. It's crazy how much is out now. It's exciting.
Yeah. Carl, what's your story on Star Trek?
It's pretty much a ditto of your own story. My dad would allow us to watch Star Trek on Sundays, and I remember being able to stay up and watch Star Trek in the evenings, and then once Star Trek was over, we'd have to go to bed. So it was a lot of fun watching with my parents and my family. We're huge Trekkers, all of us in my family, and Lord help you if you call them Trekkies. Big Trekkers. But yeah, I've seen pretty much every episode of everything ever produced by Star Trek, or in the Star Trek universe, and including the recent season of Picard, which is still ongoing. Um, but yeah, big fan of science fiction and Star Trek in general.
Yeah. And Mike, how about you?
Well, I did not have the family support. Nobody else in my family liked it. And so I was generally forced to record it and then watch it later when nobody else was watching. But I got into it really early. I mean, I love the thing. I got my hands on everything Star Trek I could. I mean, I went, saved up my money. I went and got the Next Generation Tech Manual, memorized the thing. And then I found out that there was a space center in Pleasant Grove, and all bets were off at that point. You know, I actually convinced my teachers to do a field trip there, and it was so amazing. And so, you know, went and did a couple of other missions, and then they were like, "Oh, well, we're looking for volunteers." Hello. And so that was seriously, I mean, technically I was a volunteer, but best job ever. I mean, there is not a job in this world that is better than working at the Space Center. So,
Yeah. And I should say that that's where we first met, when we were both
mhm.
volunteers at the Space Center. And I gotta say, I think that means, Mike, that you and I have peaked. We peaked in our late teens
Yep,
as far as jobs, and it's all downhill from there.
pretty
There will
much,
never
yeah.
be an opportunity to do something so uniquely weird and interesting and fun as that.
Hmm.
Uh, yeah,
You
that's
want to give the
a
name of it for those who might not have heard of it?
So the Krista McAuliffe Space Education Center is in Pleasant Grove. Yeah, it was started by a man named Victor Williamson, and he basically created a Star Trek simulator in the middle of his elementary school in Pleasant Grove, Utah, that ended up being the largest starship simulator on the planet at one point. Um, yeah, and so you would go, and we talk about Mike talked about how he went as a field trip, but I know that corporations and companies will send like their adult staff members there instead of sending them to a ropes course or something, so they can pretend to be a bridge crew of a starship, but do like problem solving and creative thinking and cooperative learning and things like that. And it's a marvelous little experiment. They finally tore the elementary school down and set up a new one, a new simulator under the direction now of James Porter, who is a friend of mine growing up, actually. So it's still going strong and doing just wonderful
And I'm pretty sure it's the
stuff
only
there.
elementary school that has its own observatory.
Yes, they have an observatory now. It's
In fact, I just got from my son today his permission slip to go on the field trip, the sixth grade field trip to the Space Center.
Lucky
Oh
So,
man.
yep,
guy.
still going.
Do you have to give a special? Oh, do you have to give a special permission for them to do the Kobayashi Maru?
That would be a great psychology test. Can you imagine little 12-year-olds?
I
I mean,
I
this is
remember.
already seen in Star Trek Prodigy. So there we go.
Right. Yes. Yes. I actually remember. I went once. When I went in sixth grade, I was the captain for our class, and I remember once when a bunch of the volunteers, like people like Mike and I, who worked there, all sort of drove, so to speak, a new mission, and we got killed over and over and over. We would keep rotating. Do you remember? I don't remember if you were there, Mike, or not, but
It
it was the
happened
Kobayashi.
regularly. Whenever they
Yeah.
were doing something new and we were testing it, that's how it worked out.
Well, I just remember that we kept trading out different volunteers as the captain. They're like, "I'll figure this out," and then everybody kept dying, and it kind of was the Kobayashi Maru. And I remember Mr. Williamson just thinking like, "These are the people that work for me, and they can't even. All the sixth graders are doing better than they are." And so it was,
Well, Vic
yeah.
upped the difficulty when we did it.
Well, that's fair too, but
Your boss was probably sitting behind his desk with his fingers like, "Yes, I get to kill my staff again."
Yep, and then he'd lift up his air freshener and squirt it in front of the fan.
Yep. Yep. Oh, good times. But we should probably transition to talking about Star Trek Discovery, um, which is the most recent sort of entry into the. It was at least the first of the new Trek that's come out the last couple of years.
It feels like
And
it's the mainline one, right? Like all the other ones are kind of
Mhm.
side.
I think that's a fair. Picard is kind of nostalgia, and Lower Decks is adult animation. Prodigy is for kids, but yeah, so Discovery is the main, definitely the main one. We're reviewing season 4, and spoilers ahead, like for all of our podcasts. But seasons 1 and 2 took place sort of in the Kirk era, sort of by just a little bit before the original series. But then they jumped ahead like 1,000 years, which sort of served as a soft reboot to the TV show as a whole. And I gotta say, I personally like seasons 3 and 4. I think they're some of the best Trek I've ever seen, and I recognize that that's because I like the more serious, the long form storytelling. I don't like the episodic as much. Um, but I've really enjoyed seasons 3 and 4, and I'm just curious. Moving on to the discussion now, what did you all, in general terms, think about season 4 of Discovery? And we'll start with you, Liz.
Well, it was not my favorite. I do enjoy that they did jump ahead for seasons 3 and 4. I had a hard time getting into seasons 1 and 2, being someone who has never seen the original series. So a lot of the references went like way past my head. I had to look them up on Wikipedia after, be like, oh, I see why that was interesting, but it wasn't interesting to me. Next
Sure.
Generation was always my original Star Trek. So, um, but I mean, this season was okay. I enjoyed some of the action and the serial storytelling, but I felt like every character has basically two settings, which is deadly serious or extremely awkward, and there's no in between. So I didn't feel like the characters really held up as well as I expect Star Trek characters to do.
Sure, sure. Carl, what are your impressions of season 4 now that you finished it?
Oh, what does one say about Star Trek therapy? I mean, Discovery. Uh, so I still cannot get past the fact that I knew that they had to move into a later era. They were running out of space that wasn't already occupied by somebody else's ship. Because as you said before, they were getting in. They were just right before the Kirk era, so they were going to run out of space really quickly. I like the fact that it started to tell the history of Section 31 and explain the origins of that particular section of Starfleet. I
And
wasn't
that kind of got dropped.
Yes, no, and I was about to say like I didn't appreciate that they just sort of dropped it, and we know that from Deep Space Nine that it sort of developed into this sort of humans only club, the protection of human interests within the Federation, not protection of the Federation's interests, but human interests, which didn't make any sense to me the way that they told the story and dropped it at the end of season 2, because who did they leave in charge? Well, they left Ash Tyler in charge. Is Ash Tyler a human? No, he's Klingon. So I like, how did that happen? Like, I want to know what happened. How did it turn into this xenophobic, humans only thing? But it was still fun to see kind of how it began. I love the spore drive. I wish. I mean, I guess they felt like it was one of those tropes that was super great, but at the end of season 1, they're like, oh, this may be too powerful and may make things too easy on us, so we're just gonna sort of ignore it for a while. But I did like how they explored the what is it, the mycelial network, and how travel through it instantaneously through our galaxy could work. I just thought that was absolutely super brilliant. Um, but then at the end of season 2, they decide that they're going to jump forward and talk about a suspension of disbelief, okay? So let's say that I'm a member of the crew, okay? I may really like my crew, but if only one person has to carry the sphere data into the future to protect it theoretically from this AI threat, which still is a storyline that wasn't closed off, um, why does everyone on the ship have to go with me?
The poor
I'm,
ensigns who have been, just it's like, oh, okay, now your life is ruined. None of them are,
right. It's like
huh? The
it's like
minimum
I like you
wagers.
guys, but am I going to leave everybody that I've ever known for a potential future where we don't even know if the Federation is going to exist? Which, once we get to season 3, we sort of know that it doesn't exist anymore. So I just, yeah, that really that threw me for a loop. I did like the fact that they jumped into the future. It was more of a it opened it up more for exploration, which is really what Star Trek is all about. But still, the end of season 2 threw me for a loop. I kept thinking to myself, wow, really? This is how they're going to try to extend the series? Okay, you know what? It's Star Trek. I've enjoyed it since I was a kid. Why not go with it?
So
That's where I am on Star Trek.
So before we move to Mike's view of it, I just a question for you, Carl. I I don't like seasons 1 and 2 because it's also very dark, and I felt like seasons 3 and 4 they get more back to the optimism of the future and the things we can solve and problems to work out and things. I almost tell people just ignore seasons 1 and 2. All you need to know is that they jump to the future and they have like a bunch of data from this really ancient sort of sentient ship thing that it downloaded to their computer and just go from there.
Oh, you're right. When it comes to season 3, you can definitely tell the difference of night and day where the story writers behind the scenes went from feeling handcuffed to, what is existing and what they can fill into the existing timeline to a completely blank slate. So suddenly it's like, oh, we can be, writers again. So yeah, absolutely the optimism returned.
Yeah.
Writers
I don't
room.
know. I don't know. I feel like season 3 was still a little bit pessimistic because we had that fractured federation in hiding, and we've got the burn, and nobody trusts each other. It still felt a little bit dark. I agree that season 4, for sure, I felt more like this is the Federation again, except for that it's not a federation that runs with like military order, because there's always this question of the people leading the ship basically like suggesting something, and then everybody's gonna be like, do we really have to do that? Like it's not running like you would expect a military crew to run.
Yeah, that's one of my complaints as well. That there was a scene where the captain comes to one of the junior officers and says, "It's okay that you weren't in control for 5 minutes." And I was like, "No, that you are a military officer. That is not okay." And I'm just reminded of Star Trek Generations, where Data's trying to figure out the emotion chip that he now has, and he doesn't think he can function and wants to be turned off. And Picard like yells at him and says, "No, I will not deactivate you. Perform your duty. That's an order." And Data's like, "Oh, yes, sir." And I felt like at least the earlier versions of Trek sort of understood that.
I need you to.
Sir, I no longer want these emotions. Deactivating me is the only viable solution.
Part of having feelings is learning to integrate them into your life, Data. Learning to live with them. No matter
Sir,
what the circumstances.
I cannot.
You will not be deactivated. You're an officer on board this ship, and I require you to perform your duty. That is an order, Commander.
Yes, sir. I will try, sir.
Sometimes it takes courage to try to. And courage can be an emotion, too.
But we haven't finished our roundtable yet.
Allergic to authority, kind of in the same way that our modern society wants to question authority and everything. So they want all the decisions of the captain to be verified by logic. There's no like, listen to me, I'm the captain, so I'm in charge and get to make the decisions. I'll listen to your input, but I get to make decisions. It's not like that.
Yeah, that's one of my complaints. Mike, we haven't got to you for your overall thoughts on it yet. But feel free to comment on anything that's sort of been said before as we've sort of begun our conversation already.
Well, I thought it started out pretty promising and creatively, right? Quajon gets destroyed by this massive gravitational anomaly, and I thought that was really good. I mean, given Book's connection with this planet, I thought that really, his character was much more believable than, say, Tarka. Tarka was not believable at all. But I like the idea is like, okay, we're dealing with something completely different. I was very curious. What are they gonna do with this? Like, where is this going? I wouldn't have guessed um, aliens that communicate with pheromones and lights. Um, but the problem that I had generally is I think that they wrapped it up too fast. I mean, they had 13 episodes, which is a little bit more than usual, and they still had to rush it. If they had done maybe a little bit less on the therapy side, like Carl was saying, maybe they could have paced it better. I mean, like at the very end, it's like we went from communicating, 1+1 = 2, and figuring out how to say we, to Saru like going off on these giant expositions about what they're saying. I'm like, really? And I think that was driven because they had to wrap up the show, wrap up that storyline. But they definitely could have paced things a lot better. And I think, like some of the things I think were cop out. Like Tarka, I think was a cop out. They could have definitely found some other way to have and somebody to create some of that drama, where it's not like, okay, I'm gonna go do something just so I can get back to my guy. That's going to destroy.
Not just do something. I'm gonna like destroy the known universe so I can get back to my friend.
I'm gonna destroy them, and I'm gonna destroy them, and I'm gonna destroy them, and I'm totally cool with that because I'm gonna get to a place in some alternate reality where this dude may not even know me, but that's okay because then at least he'll be there. Really? I don't know. I didn't buy that.
I don't disagree with any of your criticisms of the show. It felt a little rushed. I also felt that Tarka was very weirdly underdeveloped, and that made him more one-dimensional and sort of mad scientist than he needed to be. But at the same time, I also think that there's not enough military discipline going on the ship. But I still really liked the whole season because it felt to me like, so there were two things that I really liked about it. The one was that I like that they brought in the Federation president, and this might have something to do with the military discipline. The fact that she was always kind of there, running around, and so then you have the civilian sitting on this military ship, who has authority of other people. I liked that character though, and sort of we need to get everybody together and sort of discuss and debate and figure out how we want to deal with this major threat. Do we want to attack it head on? Do we want to try first contact? And I liked sort of that aspect of the show, and I do like that it seemed that there was a fair amount of optimism again. Like, whatever we do, we can figure this out together. Which felt so different than the first couple of episodes, or the first couple of seasons to me. So, I don't know, it's weird that I agree with everything you've said, but it didn't affect me the same way, like to the same extent.
The parts that I did enjoy the most were the which was what was missing from the first 3 seasons of Star Trek. Having everybody together in this council and let's exchange ideas and think about how you would deal with a massive weapon running around that's launched by people you can't communicate with and you don't know who they are. Like, that kind of thinking through a moral dilemma and a plan of action is what I like about Star Trek and what makes Star Trek different than other science fiction. I always have not liked the J.J. Abrams movies just because, they're reboots again of the original series, which is not my favorite, but he turned Star Trek into an action adventure sci-fi, which is never what Star Trek was intended to be. It's supposed to be a moral dilemma, philosophizing, thinking about the best parts of humanity kind of thing.
Yeah, and you're not supposed to blow your special effects budget on lens flares.
Yes, that too. I wouldn't mind the lens flares if we kept the thinking about difficult moral questions. And so there was a little more of that, but I mean, we're still missing some of my favorite kinds of Star Trek episodes. Like there's no lawyer episodes like Measure of a, where we have a court case, and there's no Q who's putting humanity on trial and asking whether Picard is human enough, if humanity deserves to exist. So I miss those kind of episodes, and I don't know if there's a place for them in the kind of serial storytelling that we're going for nowadays. But
Oh, and we totally left all of the quirky ones like Little Green Men and the episodes with Ferengis who save their Moogie. I mean
or
that
the
kind of
holodeck episodes,
say what?
holodeck episodes, episodes.
Oh, I totally agree. So and so the development of characters, I think that they've just started. I mean, you spent 3 long seasons developing this central character into one who can finally sit in the captain's chair, and that's Michael Burnham. And then finally in season 4, we start to do a little bit of, spreading out into the rest of the crew and relying on the rest of the crew to be able to, be intelligent individuals instead of just background. And I was a little bit irritated that for, 3 seasons they were developing Tilly, and then suddenly Tilly's gone.
Me
And
too.
I don't understand that. Like, I was invested in Tilly. I'm just like, okay, so she starts at the bottom. We're going to get to see her develop and advance all the way up, potentially, to her own captaincy one day. And maybe that's how they end the series is that, Tilly finally gets offered her own command one day. But then she just disappears. And it's like, what is going on here? I'm hurt by this. Oh, man.
I would agree. I like that they are now finally developing other characters more instead of having it just be the Michael Burnham show the whole time with Saru as kind of a sidekick character. Although I would like to say I think it's cool that he was the captain in season 3 because it was the first because we've had like the white male captain. We had 2 of those, right? Then we had the black captain. We had the woman captain. Now we finally, for the first time, had the alien captain, and that was cool. And now, of course, in Michael Burnham, we have the black female captain, so we're hitting all our intersectionality points. I also don't like that they wrote Tilly out. At the same time, I thought that her going to be a teacher at the newly reformed Starfleet Academy is perfect because I think she would be like a really good teacher at the Starfleet Academy. Like that fits her character, even if I think they handled it clunkily. So yeah, I to have someone who sort of had jumped 1,000 years in the future, back from when the Federation was really getting formed, and is just so incredibly optimistic about everything. I don't know. I thought it fit her character, even if I agree with you that there was some clunkiness in how they handled it.
Well, that's really the overarching theme with Star Trek Discovery in seasons 3 and 4 is clunky handling. I mean, they had this brilliant, as I said before, this brilliant move into 930 years in the future, giving them this blank canvas that they could have done so many things with, and they handled these transitions as if they weren't, nobody thought ahead. And this is from a series that was literally not written to be episodic. It was written to be, this long arching story, this well told story. And they went from the story being, I thought, fairly well told in seasons 1 and 2, even though I completely acknowledge it was much darker than Star Trek normally is, to reintroducing the positivity in season 3 and the adventure and the exploration, but then not doing so well with it, getting lost in the potential details and sort of running into, it felt like everything was rushed. It was run into deadlines. They ran into deadlines, and things were just handled clunkily, I think is the absolute perfect word that describes seasons 3 and 4 handling.
There's something else that I wanted to get y'all's thoughts on, um, and that's sort of the worldview of this new Star Trek, because it seems to me that it has a much more explicitly liberal worldview in some ways, and like
in in some ways.
well, okay, like
So going back to something Liz said earlier, Star Trek's always been more of a philosophical type show, right? Um, and they've dealt with some issues that are current issues, right? I mean, you have the first interracial kiss in the original series, right? Um, and I always liked the tension between, I shouldn't say tension, that's the wrong word, but the relationship between faith and science in Deep Space Nine, right? And I never really felt like Star Trek was preachy, right? It was, here's something, food for thought. Um, and that's kind of how it's been. But with Discovery, um, and I think it's less so in season 4, but this, it's like, all right, well, we've got a gay married couple on uh, on the ship. Um, I'm not totally sure what to make of the human character that was carrying a symbiote, because that really threw out a ton of lore that we've had from Deep Space Nine on the Trill. Um, but to me, it's like part of the problem is, or even something like Liz was saying earlier, the decentralization of authority. I mean, it's a freaking starship. Someone's got to be making decisions, um, and people have to follow those decisions. But there, it's um, you know, exploration by committee, um, which I don't think is Star Trek. And the writers, I think, are kind of lazy because they don't show their work, right? They're just taking this. This is the way it is, um, and saying to people,
And there's a surprising amount of homogeneity between the crew, which is, you see that like they always need to bring someone from outside of the crew to disagree with Burnham and present an alternative opinion. We have the president in a couple episodes who shows up to question Burnham, but not very hard because she always ends up agreeing with Burnham. And then they bring back the character who had gone to another part of Star Trek also to question Burnham and make the hard decision that she can't make, because apparently none of her bridge crew is going to do that for her. Which is, I feel like, what we're missing. We're missing that dynamic where they can question and push each other and have genuinely different worldviews on the same ship.
And that's one of the things I think is so great about Star Trek, right? Because it's like our world here, unless you're a politician in DC, you know, the rest of us out in the real world work with people of various persuasions, different religious beliefs, different worldviews, and yet we all make it work, right? Like in my office, um, I'm in Salt Lake, but members of the church are in the minority. Active members of the church are in the minority in my office. Does that mean we don't get along? No, these are the best people I ever could have worked with. And, you know, that I think is lost, right? It's not so much, it's like these culture wars are all about winning, which is what we see in Fox News and MSNBC and CNN and all that. When in reality, the great thing about the world and about like our country specifically is we're all different, and that's okay. We can all work together to work for something better. Um, and that's, I think, something that's missing from this iteration of Star Trek.
Do you think some of the homogeneity, that the crew because the crew had to be forced to come together? The storytelling from seasons 1 to 4, where we are now, is a story of people who aren't ready for command. Because you started with Georgiou, right? Philippa Georgiou. And she was definitely in command. But the people underneath her weren't quite ready yet. And suddenly she's gone, and these two people that remain, these two commanders, Burnham and oh goodness,
Saru.
what's his name? Sir, thank you. Um, now are responsible, okay? And neither seems to be really ready for it. And the rest of the crew reacts to that. And they figure, you know what, as long as I keep my head down and I do my job, then, it just fit in, then, no one can blame me if something goes wrong. And as time goes on, they internalize that. Like you start building these experiences, from seasons 1, 2, and 3. A good example is in season 3 at the very beginning, as they're passing through the wormhole into 931 years in the future. They crash on this planet, and the ship is held together, and everyone is relieved. How did we survive that given the circumstances? And they're all giving credit to their pilot, to Detmer. But Detmer is suffering from PTSD at this point because she's pretty sure that, she didn't save the ship, or that she's not sure that she was at all in control. And the experience itself is, did I do my job? I'm hanging on really, really tightly. I'm really wound into this, making sure that I don't screw up, so that no one can blame me. And it ends up resulting in her having this, I would say a pretty severe case of PTSD. Um, and it shows, in season 4. I mean, let's get right down to it, okay? We were jokingly calling it, Star Trek therapy for season 4, but that's what season 4 was, wasn't it? That it was this building of experiences of, trauma that drew the crew together, that eventually developed a central character in Burnham, who eventually got back to the point, from being completely, court-martialed in the first season, to get all the way back to a point where she could actually take command of the crew, to be the captain. Like we got her coming of age story in seasons 1, 2, and 3. It's actually not too bad of a story arc if you really think about it.
That's a great arc.
Positive.
Yeah.
But in that time, there were casualties, and um, because of the way that the story arc works, people have to come together, and they have to grow, and they have to experience trauma. And we begin to learn how each person, Saru has his garden, and the president of Navarre has, the customary spiritualism that she turns to, the Vulcan, spiritualism. We have the general that comes from Earth in season 4, who is all about duty, and she holds fast to duty as her way of coping with, the trauma, the shared trauma of the entire galaxy at this point, from the burn and from the fall of the Federation. So it's sort of not surprising to me, and I don't think it should be surprising to anyone, that season 4 really is about therapy. It's about dealing with low-grade trauma, PTSD, and grief. I love what Mike said earlier about the believability of the characters of, is it Tarka and Booker. So the only reason Tarka had any believability or relatability to him was because Booker was there. It's because you could relate to Booker, you could understand his grief, and you could understand the struggle that he was going through that entire season, as to what is the right thing to do here. So for us, he was the one that we could relate to when it came to determining what's the right thing to do. He was the focal point character. Tarka was the devil on the left shoulder, and of course, Burnham is the angel on the right shoulder. So, um, interestingly enough, if you look at it from that standpoint, um, Burnham was no longer the central character as of season 4. It was Booker. So they switched their
Yeah.
central character, and the I'm gonna let you guys, address this, but I think it is. I think that they went a step too far when it came to therapy, when the the AI computer that they brought back from, brought to the future was in desperate need of therapy. So, like, really, like, okay.
My main issue with it is not that we are presenting issues of mental health. Those are obviously important issues. I really enjoyed the way they were presented in Encanto in our first episode. The reason I don't enjoy them in Star Trek Discovery is because they put the therapy in the middle of the action. So it's like
Yes.
Burnham has to make a hard decision. We're in the middle of the action. Can I talk to you in the ready room? And we're going to do some therapy for half an hour or whatever. And then we're going to go back and try to get the tension back and make the decision. And that just kills your narrative tension. So yes, we should. I think it's great, especially in a long form story, to realistically say these characters would be very traumatized by what's happening to them and deal with that. But the way the story is structured does not work, because we do that at least once an episode. We're in the middle of a tense scene, and then it's like, hey, let's step out and get some therapy and deal with your issues before we make this. And it's not, let's discuss the issue and this difficult decision you're making. It's, let's discuss your personal feelings, and then you'll be able to make the right decision.
Oh,
Yeah, yeah. So for me, the parallel here would be to a different science fiction show that I also really enjoyed, which was Battlestar Galactica, which at the time felt very prescient in its discussion of Cylon sleeper agents and terrorism, and the whole fact that everybody from this wiped out human civilization, all these survivors in this ragtag fleet, had an entire wall where they would put the pictures of their dead loved ones. And as someone who was serving his mission in Manhattan when 9/11 happened, it was very reminiscent of that. And Battlestar Galactica felt like it was the show that met that moment in sort of its discussion of these different issues. When I rewatched it 10 years later with my wife, it didn't land the same way for me. And I almost wonder if the fact that we as a society have all gone through this sort of collective trauma with the pandemic the last couple of years, and I have a 3-year-old kid with asthma. He hasn't gotten vaccinated yet. I still kind of am in the middle of this in ways that a lot of other people have been able to move on from, and frankly, that creates a little resentment in me. And to have the show be about so much therapy, I wonder if it's going to be like Battlestar Galactica. If maybe maybe they handled it clunky in places, but maybe it was a good thing for us to sort of see, and discussions to have available on our TV shows that we're watching, so that we can all sort of help use it to process what we've been through. And when we rewatch it 10 years from now, it's not going to land the same way. But that's the thought I have about it, is that maybe, again, as clunky as they handled it, there's still something valuable in telling this story at this particular time that I appreciated.
I see the parallels there. I mean, Cylons were computers in desperate need of therapy. As for okay, so here's my concern. So you finally finish your season 2, right? And you have Control. You're fighting against Control, which is this runaway computer, this shackled computer that's basically decided, how do I best serve my masters? Oh, let me kill everybody. And then you move forward into the future, into season 4, and suddenly you have a computer that is having emotional issues and in desperate need of therapy. And I'm thinking, oh my goodness, red flag, we just got away from this. I know how they're trying to humanize her, but that was the first thing I thought to myself, was just like, are you people crazy? This is a computer that literally controls the life support upon which you all need to survive. So I don't know.
It is weird that they are being consistent about everything except for the science and the characters. It's like, we learned that AI computers go crazy and bad, and so we're not going to bring up the fact that we dealt with Control and that Control's knowledge is in the computer. There's a continuity to characters, but not continuity to the science and the world building a little bit.
Right. The only difference between Control and Zora is that one has a male voice and the other one has a female voice.
Well, they did market research on that. People like female voiced computers better. It's just the way it is.
Yeah, I mean,
I'll have I'll have you know that my Siri is male and British because I'm trying to get as close to Jarvis as possible.
There you go. My mom changed her Alexa to respond to computer because Star Trek.
Right.
I did that too.
Yep.
look, my hope is that season 4 can be reclaimed, and it can be reclaimed fairly easily if season 5 gets away from therapy. If we can show that that these people are reaching some semblance of mental health, or reaching back to some semblance of mental health, and give us a story in season 5 that isn't so dark, that isn't so really just isn't so right, that isn't so rushed. I didn't like the fact that they started out with, creating a common understanding of, oh, we didn't know that you were higher beings until, we you, we you guys responded to us, and we understood that you understood, basic mathematics. 3 is less than 4, and so on and so
I
forth.
did enjoy that because that's like something we really do with science, which is one of the things that, like, it's the thing that SETI is sending out into the universe, right? Basic mathematics, because we think that's how we're going to communicate.
Sure, but
And I like that.
how did we get that from that in one episode to the next episode? Doing complex, discussions about how it hurts us for you to, go and run your thing that we don't even know what to call it. They don't call it a DMA. We call it we still haven't figured out what, to call that between us. But that thing that you're running, and it's destroying worlds around us, and whatnot, and we're sad about that. And they respond back, oh, we're we're so distressed that we caused, blah blah blah. Well, how did you communicate with 1+1 that you destroyed billions of worlds?
It,
Well, and
it,
also the question, I feel like in other Star Treks, once you communicated that, there would still be the problem of they were using the DMA for a reason, and they need that resource. And then we didn't deal with that. We just said, oh, well, you should shut down your shield and change your way of life. And that's the part that I feel was missing. That we're missing we have competing interests, and even though we recognize you as human, we are different. And then negotiating something between there, like, can we help map places for them? It's no, you give in entirely to our demands and environmentalism. And
although I'd like to point out that, Liz, you just used a terribly racist term. We recognize you as human. Just reminds me of like the best line from Star Trek. No, it's the second best line from Star Trek 6. It's like, well, we believe everybody has certain inalienable human rights, and the Klingon woman's like, inalien human rights? My goodness, the very term is racist.
sorry, sentient being.
Right.
We do believe all planets have a sovereign claim to inalienable human rights.
Inalien. If you could only hear yourselves. Human rights. Why, the very name is racist.
No, the best line, of course, is you've never experienced Shakespeare unless you've read him in the original Klingon from Star Trek 6, but...
You have not experienced Shakespeare until you have read him in the original Klingon.
Even Spock was told that he makes a very good human, and he said, "I'm insulted."
Right. No, that's a fair point. But I think we've all sort of agreed that there are issues and problems that we had. What I'd like to do to sort of wrap up, because we're coming up on the end of our time, is I would like everybody really briefly to say something that you did enjoy about the show, because it seems like we all have issues, but we all still quasi liked it, but we haven't talked about that second part yet. So Mike, we haven't heard from you for a little bit, and I know you're wrestling with a cold right now, but what was something that you liked about this season of Discovery that would make you want to at least recommend it a little bit to somebody?
I do enjoy the character development that we get through episodic storytelling. I think they could do a much better job of it. But, you know, one of the things I thought we got a lot of really good stuff on Deep Space Nine was when they moved over to that with the Dominion War story, right? And they didn't just focus on Cisco or Kira. They had everybody had their part, right? I kind of wonder if they had done something similar in Next Generation, if we would have heard more from Dr. Crusher or Geordie LaForge, right? Develop them a little bit more too. So I do enjoy the fact that the episodic storytelling gives them the ability to do more character development. I just hope they can spread it out, right? Like name the people who are on the bridge. You know, you've got Michael, Saru, Detmer, Owoshikun, and the other people. Right?
And something I even discovered is that the one officer who in seasons 1 and 2 was like the robot person who had a lot of like implants or whatever else, that character dies and they replaced her with somebody else, but it's the same actress actually. And so I just wonder if that actress is like, you know what, I don't want to be in makeup for 8 hours a day to get these metal plates, you know, glued onto my skull.
Yep.
But I don't even know what her name is. I don't know what either of those characters' names are.
Mm-hmm.
And so yeah, that's a fair point. But I do also agree with that. Liz, what's something you enjoyed about this season?
I think I have to say it's the episode with Tilly and the ensigns. There's a little bit of or the cadets. They're not ensigns until the end.
Right. Yes.
It's a little bit clunky, the science parts of it, but it felt the most Star Trek-y to me because it was people who genuinely disagreed with each other and had problems in their past, but they have to pull together and there's a scenario and they have to use their brains to figure it out, and there's self-sacrifice. And I felt like that episode embodied all of like the best parts of Star Trek.
You mentioned that you think the science is a little clunky. The thing for me that irritated me the most, I still remember back in Star Trek Generations when the star explodes at the beginning and they beam everybody off that space station and Picard's like, Warp 1, engage.
Commander Riker's team is aboard, sir.
Helm, Warp 1, engage!
And as a science guy, I'm like, yes, once you get to Warp 1, anything the star puts out, by definition, isn't going to catch up to you. Because it's a natural phenomenon. It can't go faster than the speed of light. But then we have in Discovery, they have to go through the galactic barrier, which isn't a thing. Like, that's complete nonsense. The problem is, that's literally the first episode of the original series, is when they go through the galactic barrier and what's-his-face, Gary, starts becoming a god. And so it's there in the history of the show, so I don't know. You work with what you've got.
Yeah. I also really enjoyed the saloon casino episode. There's a great tradition of poker games in Star Trek, and I felt like that really brought that back with the game that Michael and Book play against each other to knock out the third competitor. So I really enjoyed that episode as well.
Yeah, that's fair. You're right. That the one with the cadets was a fun episode. Yeah.
It felt the most Star Trek to me.
Sure. Carl, what about you?
Oh, what do I like about it? I mean, at the end of the day, it is Star Trek, and they have poured an enormous amount of money into the production value. One thing I will let them get away with is at the end of season 4, when they had their moment of what is it, the anti-Bechtel that you're talking about before, Carl?
Oh yeah, the scene, yeah. What? Well, let me explain what this was sort of. We were talking about this in the
Turning Red episode.
In the Turning Red episode, where the Bechdel test is sort of a feminist critique of movies, where you ask the question: are there two named female characters in the movie that talk to each other about something other than a man? And if that is true, then it passes the Bechdel test. Because so many movies have only one character, or they have two, but they never talk to each other, or if they do, they're talking about a man. But yeah, at the end of season 4 of Discovery, they have a scene between the United Earth General, who is female and black, the Discovery captain, who is also black and female, the Federation president, who is human, Cardassian, and Bajoran combined,
female,
and female, and then the president of Earth, played by Stacey Abrams, who is also female and black. It's a part of a long tradition of having big Star Wars Oh boy, I'm going to start that sentence over. It's part of a long tradition of having Star Trek fans do cameos, like the King of Jordan was in an episode of Voyager just because he was a fan and was touring the thing, and they're
The
like,
Rock
"We're going to have you
one.
on." The Rock was in one.
She's the first politician, though, and to me, that like a lot of the others that we had talked about, like offline, they're astronauts, right? They're people who have worked to advance, advance science and our space exploration, which a lot of Star Trek people really enjoy. I'm pretty sure, I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure she's like the first politician that they've ever had.
I think the King of Jordan counts as a politician, but
just not an American politician.
I don't know if I count a king as a politician, but
fair enough. But back to the Bechdel test. It passes the Bechdel test with flying colors. Anyway, so that's just for those listening out in podcast land for what you're talking about. But go ahead, Carl. Finish your thoughts. Sorry.
So, and thank you for that explanation. So, they made a conscious decision to leave men out of this most pivotal end of season conversation, which is all about there is a lot of work that it needs to be done. We've gotten to this point. Thank you for getting us there. Now, let's pull together and let's start bringing the Federation back together. It's going to take a lot of work. And the reason I'm willing to let them get away from that is because they did it well enough in my mind that I didn't even notice there were no men really present in the conversation. To me, it was just people. And they were, the people that needed to have the conversation. Of course, as I'm thinking to myself, oh, they had to include Stacey Abrams as president of Earth. Okay, whatever. It doesn't bother me at all. If it does, Stacey Abrams can be president of Earth 1,000 years after I'm dead, fine. Go for it. But I'm willing to let them get away with that because I think they did that. It was a very poignant scene, and I think that they did it well enough to escape escape any.
It comes about very naturally, right? It doesn't feel like, hey, look, representation, right? It feels like these are just the characters we have, and you don't even notice it. And that's the way I personally like my representation, because you don't want it to feel like this character was only included because we needed a representative from this race or this gender or this sexual minority. It's like characters, which is great.
It didn't feel rammed down my throat, so I completely agree, Liz. It's exactly what it was. So
none of the characters was named Token, like the little black kid from South Park.
Oh dear.
But I mean, yeah. So I like that. That to me put at least a palatable capstone on the let's call it the cherry on top of the season 4 sundae.
I do wonder if, is like we talked about, how season 3 serves, season 3 serves as a reboot because they jump 1,000 years into the future. If season 5 might also serve as a sort of new reboot, now that the Federation's all back together. Like, they literally moved Federation headquarters back to Earth. And Earth is like, all right, we're going to rejoin the Federation. And so, like, hey, the gang's all here. And so I wonder if season 5 will be like normal Star Trek, but in the future. And that's interesting, because that, to me, is the note I'm going to end on. That I do like that seasons 3 and 4 were much more optimistic Trek. I kind of have told this to several people. If you want to see what kind of show Discovery has become, watch the first 10 minutes of the first episode of season 4. where they show up and there's this problem, they solve it in 10 minutes. It's sort of like a mini episode where the king or the emperor or whoever he is of this particular planet, who used to be a member of the Federation, is like, why he ends it with, why are you being so nice to us? We just tried to shoot you down and treated you very poorly. And she's like, here's your dilithium. We're the Federation. It's what we do. And I was really happy to see that attitude represented more moving forward.
You did not experience a pleasant visit, Captain Burnham.
That's one way of putting it.
Then may I inquire, why still give us your dilithium?
Because we're the Federation. It's what we do. And if you need anything else, we're here. No strings attached.
I don't know. I've enjoyed it, but we're gonna end by going through and rating it per our usual sort of system here. Our first rating is objectionable content or good content, and we rate things celestial, terrestrial, telestial, or outer darkness. And I'm curious how you would all like to rate season 4 of Star Trek Discovery. And we'll start with you, Liz. What did you think?
I think I've got to put it in terrestrial just because I don't feel like they give enough play for any kind of religious viewpoint.
This is something that I have watched every episode of Trek except for the most recent season of Picard. There aren't any religious characters. The major characters in the original series, none of them have major religious beliefs. They, in the Next Generation, I don't think any of them do. I
think
Deep
you can
Space
count the
Nine,
Klingon beliefs. I think they do make Worf pretty much.
That's fair.
There's a whole culture of honor, and it's religious, and there's rituals and different things.
That's fair. To me, one of the more interesting things about this was the one human they showed that had a religion was Chakotay. And I was like, oh, you're allowed to have a Native American religion, but they wouldn't have a Muslim in the 24th century. And I thought that was a little weird. So, I don't know, but that's always been a theme of Star Trek to me, is that this is a future where they're kind of post-religion. And that's something I don't like about Trek as a whole. I did like some of the stuff in season 2 where they were dealing with sort of religious issues around what the Red Angel was, and I really liked Christopher Pike at one point says a version of oh shoot, now I'm forgetting the rule. Any sufficiently advanced technology would be indistinguishable from magic, and he says any sufficiently advanced extraterrestrial intelligence would be indistinguishable from God. And I was like, ooh, that's an interesting point, and something that I liked.
Definitely people are going to struggle with the gay couple and the transgender couple. From a Mormon perspective, those are going to be things that are harder for people to deal with, and you might not want to watch because of those things. There is the genocide of a whole planet, so maybe that's a little tough to deal with as well. Yeah, I don't think I could give it celestial. I'd probably go with terrestrial.
Okay, yeah. What did you think of it, Mike?
I would probably also say terrestrial. Like I said before, I think it, rather than give us food for thought and discuss things, it's, really homogenized. And frankly, I don't think that does anybody any favors. But it was better than some of the previous seasons, so I will go with terrestrial.
Carl, what did you think?
It's absolutely terrestrial. I mean, going back to earlier, in this podcast, my dad would not have allowed us to watch this at night or on Sunday. The Next Generation was something that was completely different, very optimistic. This this version, this new, Star Trek is a little bit more, let's just call it adult themed. And by that I don't mean pornographic, but I do mean that we're talking about issues of mass issues of mental health, PTSD, how we deal with grief, some healthy ways of dealing with grief, and some definitely very unhealthy ways of dealing with grief in Tarka's case. Um, so if you're old enough to have a I want to say a testimony of your own and an identity of your own, then watching this will be something that you can enjoy. But it is by no means anywhere close to a celestial, or meant as anything close to G or even PG. So it's
Although I do think they've toned the violence down from season 1 and 2, particularly season 1, with the whole transforming into a Klingon from a human, and there's like definitely a rape scene on camera. I started watching those ones with my kids and thinking we were going to have the same experience, and then I was like, halfway through the first episode, I said, "This is not something you guys can watch. Sorry, guys."
Well, there is some. It's unfortunate that even you're right. There's not a whole lot of what I would call gratuitous violence. But as we get into season 3, I mentioned this before, on our earlier recording, but I was always concerned with season 3. Episode 2, I believe, is when they find their way into the mining town, looking for help. And they're trying to get away from the killer ice, and they have to get indoors, and they're tracked in there by bounty hunters, or people who are it's very Wild West in a saloon type of feel, which wasn't so bad in and of itself. But at the end, and when they finally get control back, from the bad guy who goes in and kills at least one innocent person in that episode, who, if you remember at the beginning of that episode, he's just like, "You guys are Federation. We've heard about the Federation, and they're trying their best to kind of hold it together and see if they can reestablish the Federation." And this guy from the Orion Syndicate comes in with his thugs and murders the poor guy, with this hope in his heart that the Federation might be restored. And at the end, you know, to get revenge, they write it as, "Oh, we'll send this guy out into the cold where it's very likely he will die, because he doesn't have the resources to be able to survive, but we're completely okay with that." When, in old Star Trek tradition, they would have just stunned the guy and tied him to a chair, right? I don't see Geordi or Worf or Data, being that cruel, or seeking that kind of revenge, and that to me seemed really dark. So that almost teetered it for me as on the closer to the edge of Telestial than Terrestrial. But I think for the most part, it kind of safely is on the side of Terrestrial. So
I'm gonna have to go with Terrestrial as well. It's interesting, Liz, you brought up the gay couple and the transgender storyline, which weren't really present in season 4 as much. I felt like their season 3 was more kind of the way you didn't like your representation, Carl, sort of more in your face. Although part of me, from just the storytelling point of view, has to point out that if you're going to do gay representation, you have to mention that they're gay, because you can tell, like, if you're doing black representation, Lieutenant Uhura is just there, right? We all understand that. So they do have to at least somehow bring it up if they're going to do it. But they were not as present in season 4, and I thought that was to everybody's benefit. So I'm also.
I just find it interesting that they're the only ones with a functional relationship, because the only other relationship we have is Booker and the captain, and they are not communicating well.
Yeah, that is a very dysfunctional relationship. That is true. All right, as far as our rating on artistic merit, 1 to 5 popcorn balls. We'll start with you this time, Carl. How would you rate season 4 of Discovery?
I'm not going to go too far into details, but I will give it 4 popcorn balls. I thought that they spent their budget as well as they possibly could, and I think that they delivered an enjoyable product that I'm willing to watch at least once again. That's sort of my rating is if I'm willing to watch it at least once again to pick up on details I missed before, then it deserves at least 4 popcorn balls.
Liz, what did you think? 1 to 5 popcorn balls.
I can't disagree about the special effects and just the overall cinematography is great. Where I think the show fails is the writing is a little weak. So, given that I'm a writer, that's kind of where I tend to judge shows. I'm pretty mean about ideas. I don't care if your effects are hokey if you have good solid storytelling, and I don't feel like this is quite there. I feel horrible. I'm debating whether to give it a 3 just because it's Star Trek, because I love Star Trek. But I think I almost have to give it a 2. Just it wasn't very compelling to me just because the writing was pretty bad.
Oh wait, we're not going to talk about Babylon 5 now?
No, well,
I do need to get to Babylon 5. I hear it's got lots of good religion hooks for me.
oh yeah, that's one we should put on the show later.
Yes, for sure.
That's
But
like
that's at least one where they had a plan.
Yeah, he walked up and said, "This is my 5-season arc, and we're gonna do it." And then they did it in 4 seasons. So like the season 4 is amazing, and then season 5's a little lackluster because they're like, "Oh, we wrapped up the main plot line because we thought we were only getting 4 seasons." And anyway, but it's
still.
But yeah,
it's a show where
it shows what planning does.
Nothing like that with a vision.
And I just like the level of outlining and storyboarding and whatever else to get to setting up a joke in season 1 that pays off at the end of season 4 is just astonishing. I love Babylon 5 for that. Mike, how about you? 1 to 5 popcorn balls, artistic merit.
I will go with 3. You know, the it's shot beautifully. I mean, everything looks amazing. I would like to see better writing at this point. And better care. I mean, the first couple seasons of a show are always a little bit difficult, right? But they should be hitting their stride now, and it seems like they're missing a beat. I'm not quite sure exactly how else to describe it, but it just doesn't seem to be coalescing as well as it should. So I'm going to go with 3.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to give it 4 myself. I'm with Carl in that though there are a few missteps, I really liked some parts of it. I liked that they brought in the Federation president and sort of what she represents. I like the whole scene where they're debating: do we do first contact? Do we attack? Liz, you brought up the episode with the cadets, which is really good. Like I felt those helped pull it along, despite the fact that Tarka is very underwritten, and the whole communication with the 10C gets wrapped up between episodes in a way that's deeply unsatisfying. But overall, I still enjoyed it quite a bit. And that coupled with the fact that it's shot beautifully, I'm gonna give it 4 popcorn balls. So anyway, and our final rating is on gospel connections or edifying, morally edifying messages. The scale is 1 to 5 apricots. And Mike, I'm going to let you go first. 1 to 5 apricots. What do you think? Gospel connections and morally edifying messages.
I don't know. I just didn't see a whole lot in it. You know, it's a story. You know, I mean, we don't consume everything just because it's going to help enrich our lives. You know, sometimes it's just a fun story, right? So I think it's a 1, but that's not necessarily a knock.
Fair enough. All right. Liz, what did you think? 1 to 5 apricots.
I feel pretty similarly. There's not a lot of relatable moral messaging besides, you know, don't murder an entire planet to get back with your friend. And if someone murders your whole planet, that doesn't justify you then going and murdering the whole galaxy. I mean, the therapy message is well taken. Like, you should seek out professional help for mental health issues. I am all for that. It's a little bit hit on the head a lot. So I'm going to go with 1 as well.
Interesting. All right. Carl, what do you give it? 1 to 5 apricots.
First of all, let me tell you that this rating system is the greatest rating system of all time. Popcorn balls and apricots, truly inspired.
It's all Liz.
As for apricots, okay, so here's where I'm at. If a show does not actively preach against or otherwise promote principles that I consider to be unchristian or un-Mormon, or on LDS, if they don't actively detract, from a person's morality, then they get 3 in my book. To get the last 2, you have to do a number of things, which also includes not therapizing a computer. They'll get 3 from me, but there's so many things that are missing here. And if you are to gather any type of gospel principles out of this, you really have to go searching for it. You have to be an adept yourself in gospel principles to be able to see the parallels. So they haven't made anything easy. This isn't like Veggie Tales, teaching you, good moral principles. It's also not boring like Veggie Tales. But yeah, so in my view, it gets 3 apricots for that reason, but no more.
I'll give an example of what you're talking about. I found this podcast called The Gospel According to Star Trek, and they do an episode for every episode of Star Trek. So they're doing a lot right now. So I listened to the one about the last episode of Discovery, and they made the argument about Book appearing to die, and then he's gone for a while and everyone grieves him, and then he comes back. They made that an analogy to Christ's death and then reappearance. And I think that's a bit of a stretch. You have to really, like you said, go looking for it to find that. It is not there on its own.
Yeah. I would agree with that. I would say, Carl, I don't think you're the target audience for Veggie Tales. So that's not a knock on Veggie Tales either. I think I'm gonna have to give it 3 apricots myself. I felt there were some moments that you could have some good discussions with your family about. Although again, this isn't super family friendly. I wonder if Strange New Worlds is going to be more the one we need to that would have the moments where you could sit down with your family on Sunday night and watch it. I feel like that's the vibe they're going for, but it hasn't come out yet, so don't quote me on that. But like you complain about therapizing the computer. I felt the whole discussion about what to do about this new emerging sentient creature was sort of the lawyer episode that Liz, decried that didn't exist. I felt there were a couple of moments like that you can certainly generate a lot of conversation, as evidenced by the fact that I think we're going way over our usual allotted time this time. So that can be useful as well. I'm going to give it 3 apricots. So
I'm just saying, if I have 100,000 years of data inside of me that I've collected from all over the galaxy and beyond, I better not need therapy at that point, or we're all in trouble.
I don't
True. She should be the best therapist out there, shouldn't she?
Right?
Agreed.
I love it. That's a fair point. So let's go around really quick and say where people can find you if they want to come argue with you on social media about anything you said here today. I'm Carl Cranny. Because I am now a co-host of this podcast, I have joined Twitter, so you can find me there at Carl Cranny. I'm also on Facebook, probably more active on Facebook. But if you want to say something, find me on Twitter. I got words. Anyway, Liz, where can people find you?
You can find my writing at lizbusby.com and links to all my social media on there.
Awesome. Carl, do you have any social media you'd like to plug?
You shouldn't argue with me to begin. No. You can find me to argue with me on Facebook. I'm not yet on Twitter, But I may, after this week's events, and maybe if Elon Musk buys more of Twitter, I may just get on Twitter. So wait for future episodes. Maybe something will have changed.
Right. There you go. I say we've had some good discussions on Facebook though, and I've enjoyed those. So yeah. Mike, anything you'd like to plug?
I'm not really on social media, so if you disagree, you have the right to disagree. I'm not going to hear about it.
And you're probably you probably need less therapy because you're not on social media. Although, just as a real quick plug, those of you who read Jonathan Haidt's new article in The Atlantic that came out like 2 days ago, that was amazing. And I think, Mike, it shows that maybe you are the correct person here to just not be on social media at all. But anyway, yeah. Thank you, everybody, for coming here. This has been Pop Culture on the Apricot Tree, encouraging you to seek after everything virtuous, lovely, of good report, or praiseworthy. See you next time.
Bye.
Bye-bye.